All right, welcome to today's video, everybody. I have a very special guest, someone that I have learned a ton from throughout the past few years. One of the first people I started following when I really got into bodybuilding and online fitness and everything. And I'm assuming pretty much all of you guys know who this is, but Alex, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yo, this is Alphadestiny, and I'm here today on the Basement Bodybuilding channel. Can't wait to chat with you, bro. I think you provide a lot of great information on natural bodybuilding, and you got some interesting takes on programming. So it's going to be real fun.
Yeah, much appreciated. I think there's nobody I'd rather get their opinion on this stuff than you. So yeah, let's get into it a little bit. The first thing that I kind of want to talk about is just going to be overall like progressive overload and kind of like the anxiety that surrounds it and finding that happy medium between like trying to force progressive overload to happen and trying to allow it to happen through the proper training fundamentals. So as you guys know, my biggest philosophy is not the biggest, but one of them is going to be called progressive overload anxiety. And as you know, that was a video I probably put out about a month ago where I was talking about how a lot of people tend to get progressive overload anxiety, where they start to slowly like kind of shift their focus away from isolations once your progress starts to stall out, and you take naturally the heaviest lifts and the most loadable lifts that you have in your program, and you bias those because you can keep milking the progression. And then once you start to reach like a plateau on those lifts, what you'll do is start to like tweak your form a little bit, maybe go a little bit higher on your squats and maybe do low bar instead. And ultimately, these tiny little things start to add up, from ignoring some isolation movements to changing your form on the compound movements and changing your tempo and rep totals and whatnot, and just overall your technique, stance, grip, that kind of stuff. You start to sacrifice what actually drives muscle growth in the first place. So Alex, I'm sure you've heard me talk about like progressive overload, real and artificial, kind of progressive overload anxiety. I just want to get your take on everything and hear what your thoughts are about that.
So basically, it's the opposite of getting more out of less weight. You're
Exactly.
making your leverages so good as if you're a competitive strength athlete, when that's not the goal of most people who watch you to fitness. And you end up just beating up your recovery for no reason. And then at some point, becoming a strength athlete, because that becomes the primary way. How do I maximize the weight on the bar? And how do I make progressive overload the fastest? And so you might start using the max effort method. You might start following advanced periodization strategies. You might start doing comp style lifts almost exclusively, or just in general, having very high specificity training, which is excellent if you want to blow up your strength in a fast amount of time. But for hypertrophy, it's certainly not optimal. And, you talk about, for example, low bar squats. We can make the argument that the absolute load itself would still drive enough quad growth. But then again, there's a lot of dudes who don't have the biggest quads doing that. It goes straight to their ass, or they got to get so strong that it's like the stimulus to fatigue ratio is not worth it. So instead of you doing, a reverse SSV squat with 400 pounds, now you're doing low bar with 500, when you could have gotten the same stimulus and directed to the quads, which is actually what you're trying to work upon. So it's like, even when we talk about the big three, great lifts in their own right, but what if we were to modify it to get even more of a hypertrophy stimulus? Like, why are we using a maximum arch on our bench press? Why using the maximum legal grip width, where you're just shortening the range of motion, having to put more weight on the bar? How about we narrow that out, flatten out that arch a bit too, use less leg drive, turn it to more of a bodybuilding motion, So that's where that whole topic of overrated lifts come into play. It's because it's misapplied.
100%. The way I see it is like the problem with being a beginner and you start to get into this mindset and it gets reinforced because you start to see some progress. What you'll see is like, okay, well, I see this advanced lifter. He's benching 405 at my gym. Natty or not, doesn't even matter because you don't even think about that when you're a beginner. But you see some guy benching 405, think he's super jacked, and your brain automatically says, okay, I need to get a 405 bench because that equals a big chest. So what do? You start to maybe train normally, and then you start to hit a plateau and you're like, okay, well, 405 bench, big chest. So technically, like, yes, the two are pretty correlated, but at the end of the day, it's more the road that takes you to the 405 bench than just getting a 405 bench, because like
Yeah.
you
And
have the specific training you have to do to get there and grow muscle at the same time, but that takes a lot longer. So when you plateau, you kind of get this anxiety, and it forces you to kind of have this fear and take little shortcuts that you don't really think about. They're kind of subconscious. Like I know for myself, like when I was squatting, obviously I trained mostly for hypertrophy, but I wanted big quads, and my squat kind of plateaued at like a 385 high bar squat, and I have long legs and I'm definitely posterior dominant. So naturally my low bar was a lot stronger. So what did I do? I switched over to low bar and added 40 pounds to my 1 rep max the first time that I tried low bar
wow.
squatting. So what did I do there? Yeah, I got stronger and I got closer to that X number that I wanted to hit for the big legs. But now I'm actually emphasizing my hips a little bit more, doing more obviously back. It's more of a hip hinge, it's a lot more glutes and a little bit less quads. And at the end of the day, it takes a toll on my recovery because the load is that much heavier. It's that much more lower back. And that's just a perfect example, and within my own training, of me having that progressive overload anxiety and just changing everything for the worse as soon as I hit the smallest little plateau, or perceived plateau at least.
Yeah, it's time consuming as well. People don't realize it. When you're lifting these advanced numbers, it's so many plates on the bar, like more warm-ups, and
Yeah.
your workout, you can't compare, like even with dumbbells. A dumbbell bench press is very quick to do. You do like 2 warm-ups, you grab the 50s, rep those out, and go straight into the hundreds and beyond. With the barbell bench press, it's like a jump, a jump, a jump until you get to your top set, and then do your back downs. And you mentioned something before about getting a 4 or 5 bench, right? I think it would guarantee a big chest for most people, but the problem is, who the fuck is going to get that? Because it took me damn near a decade to pull it off, and I have pretty good leverages on the bench. I had to bulk up, follow a system that wasn't 100% hypertrophy based to top it off. I did a lot of max effort. My recovery was destroyed. I was sleeping like a lunatic. I could have gone injured, and luckily I'm okay. But even getting that 4 or 5, it's not something you can sustain unless, you're willing to push your strength even beyond and then do a cut. So you're going to be this fluffy dude that's got this big bench. But if you were weaker, say benching 350, but you're like 12% body fat, you're going to look more aesthetic. Yeah, that's not what people are recommending. They're saying become an elite powerlifter in this. And it's like you always win, because all right, you don't have big legs. It's because you're not squatting 600. 500 wasn't enough for you. So instead of telling someone just do a quad bias squat or a hack squat, or let alone fucking leg extensions, isolate. No, bro, just add 100 pounds to your squat. That's where it gets a little bit ridiculous. Like I think you build a base, you're going to build a lot of muscle doing that. And then, some reasonable strength standards, fantastic. Like I think a 3-plate bench is very good. But at some point it gets a little bit ridiculous. Like I had guys telling me years back in 2017, Alex, you're going to have 17-inch arms guaranteed when you do 4 plates on the way to chin up. All right. I got there. I didn't have 17-inch arms. It just went straight to my back, and that's another thing. A lot of these dudes, you're going to end up with a torso dominant physique. You're going to have a massive ass with big pecs and no arms, no bis or tris.
Oh, 100%. And that's actually what happened to me, because what you see is like the guys that are strong and look great, they're typically the guys with the good genetics. And when I say good genetics, I'm not using that as like a scapegoat for having insufficient results. I'm saying it as like anything will work for them. The difference between good genetics and bad genetics for the most part is like, yeah, obviously there's some things like bone structure and whatnot, but when it comes to muscle gain, people with good genetics can respond pretty well to a lot of different things. And people with maybe like worse genetics, you have to maybe search for a little bit longer to find what rep ranges, what lifts, what volume actually works for you. And in a stage where exercise science is still kind of somewhat in its infancy, and we don't exactly know how to determine what type of genetics or muscle fibers you have, like you have to do some experimenting. And it's okay to try other things. But I guess to get back to the point you were saying about the correlation between the 405 bench and the big chest is, I do agree, definitely to an extent for sure, that having certain numbers does guarantee you a certain,
certain degree.
to a certain degree. And with that, I think the counter argument to using a method as simple as that and a mindset as simple as that is because you did it. You got to the 405 bench, which is insanely impressive. And I don't even care about strength. And you did that pretty light body weight too, which makes it even more impressive. But you firsthand saw how kind of impractical that is. Like, it took you forever. Your sleep was crazy. And for how difficult that actually is, well, it took you a decade, and maybe some people don't even have like the genetics to get there. That's a whole different conversation. And even when you do have, let's say, just regular genetics, I mean, it blew up your chest but didn't do a whole ton for your triceps, you know.
Well, that's what needs to be pointed out. Okay, you're looking at someone who has, you know, a pretty good build for the bench. You know, you can say slightly above average genetics in some respects, or maybe just above average. Let's just say that, right? And the bench press didn't work for me. I had 16.5-inch arms. How big are your arms? The same? Maybe 17?
16.5 before this arm program I've been doing. So probably, 16.5.
Okay. So how is it possible that you and me have like the same size inch arms when I did 4 plates on the bench? And I also did a 380 close grip bench. I'll tell you why, because it doesn't work. And these powerlifters are full of shit and need to stop with their minimalist advice, because you're going to end up just like me and a lot of dudes that have stick arms. You know, like I said, the pecs, usually not a problem because the bench does work it in the lengthened position. You're getting a really nice motion at the bottom. But for arm growth, you got to isolate like every bodybuilder on the face of planet Earth, you know, and that's where the powerlifters need to stay in their lane, in my opinion.
Alex, that is music to my ears. Someone with a legit following on YouTube say that. That's what I'm trying to say, and you sum that up so well. I'd say another difference with this is performance compared to the ability to perform. So let's say right now my bench is like a 275, just regular bodybuilder style. But if I was to peak and change my methods to more of a powerlifting style, maybe it is 315. So let's say you can bench, like you said, 350 with a very good bodybuilding technique. That person might have the ability to hit 405.
Oh yeah.
385 or whatever around that when they actually start to arch and widen their grip and use leg drive and actually do a peaking program. So there's a lot to be said about performance and just training and like peak performance. That is your highest potential. And the problem with that is when you are training for peak performance and trying to optimize everything to hit an arbitrary number, I mean, based on what you're saying and what I've experienced about chasing those crazy numbers, is you have no business hitting those numbers without destroying the rest of your program to a degree.
So you have no business hitting those numbers without destroying the rest of your program. That could be addressed in two perspectives, right? When you say destroying, do you mean like it's going to sacrifice your
sacrificing?
Okay. You can also say like, never mind. Yeah, it's true. Like something has to take priority. For example, if you want the biggest bench press possible, you are likely not going to have an arm day because that will sabotage your recovery. So for me, when I was training for the 405, it was max effort bench on Monday and then max effort bench on Thursday. Impossible that I could do any more arm work. Can't do it. Yeah. It's already too much.
There's that too, but it's like, yeah, so you're trying to optimize your bench, but therefore when you focus so heavily on one thing, it automatically takes emphasis and focus and the energy you have towards other areas of your program. So if I went all into, let's say, get a 405 bench like you did, there's no way I'm going to be able to sustain like my arm training, even like my leg training, because the mental just isn't there.
Well, that's another thing too, right? You can get to extreme levels where you become a full-on specialist. Like I went to the point, and I would not recommend this to anyone, where I wasn't even training my legs because I noticed that I got better recovery on my bench just by being a leg day skipper.
And it's legit. Like if you're a bench specialist, you probably should be doing that. And I'm no power lifter, so I'm not going to just sit here and so take all my powerlifting advice with a grain of salt. But I think that makes a lot of sense. And when it comes to bodybuilding, one of the biggest secrets, and nobody really talks about this, to looking big, is just having literally a balanced physique. Yes. Like you can have 2 or 3 like crazy, like freaky muscles. Like let's say you have huge biceps and calves and like a chest, but if you don't have triceps and forearms and lats, it's like you're not going to
Yeah.
look big. So dedicate kind of evenly spreading everything across when it comes to training and volume and intensity.
Yeah.
That's pretty important.
I think it's the difference of what you choose to do with your, I know you don't like the word accessory lifts, but people are familiar with it. It's what you choose to do with that for the purpose. What I mean is a powerlifter works on his weaknesses to raise his 1 rep max. A bodybuilder does it because it's proportionally lagging to the rest of his physique. And the thing is, there are some aesthetic areas that might not have any impact on a powerlifter's total. So they won't consider it a weak point. But on a physique level, it's a glaring fucking weak point. Anyone with 2 functioning eyeballs can see that. For example, having massive biceps isn't really going to help your deadlift. You know, you could say forearm strength, probably your grip, but you don't necessarily have to curl or do anything hyper specialized. And I have seen powerlifters who deadlift 700 pounds that are curling somewhere in the 30s, or the 40s are really, really difficult. Whereas you'll have some random bodybuilder that deadlifts 400 or 500 pounds, but they're curling 50s and beyond for really clean form, reps, no problem. Basically, their biceps are way bigger and way more impressive, but you know, they won't have the same level of grip strength to hold on a heavy ass weight. So it's like, what I'm saying is weak point training is not just about trying to get carryover. It's about the symmetry. And with my philosophy, I created a naturally enhanced system years back. It was hitting areas that no one was talking about, like the upper traps, the neck, the forearms, the outer extremities of the body. Because I noticed that guys who didn't have that look kind of scrawny, you know, but a lot of strength athletes aren't going to work some of those areas in particular, except for maybe strongmen. They tend to have a bit more balance.
Yeah, definitely. I really like your points about hitting kind of the outer extremities. I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think that's something that is ignored with a lot of people. Like you hear a lot of people that, and it's valid to a degree when people want like specific, they want to try and develop a complete physique through just compound movement. So someone take the deadlift, for example. It's like, okay, well, yeah, deadlift, it does work your traps. It does work your neck. It does work your forearms. But then you kind of look at it, it's like, okay,
Well,
as
that's the
important
problem.
as the weighted stretch is, you're getting no contraction in your traps, especially the upper traps. So that's a whole portion you're missing out on. And I do agree that the weighted stretch is most of like the meat and potatoes of growing your traps for sure. But there is more to be said there. Same with the neck. And even your forearms is just a pure isometric. So yeah, I mean, you're going to build some grip strength deadlifting, but you're not actually getting in any reverse curls, any wrist curls. It's just a little part of the equation. So I think it's, if when we're talking about building a complete physique in an ideal world, I think we have to take into account getting what we can practically in for volume to actually grow our forearms when it comes to different positions and flexion and extension, and not just saying, oh, you're holding a bar, so it works.
Exactly. 2 things I would say to that. So the isometrics, I feel like it's more beneficial when we're working the shortened position. So if you're doing something like a preacher curl, in which the resistance is very high at the top, like with cables or machine, you can get that squeeze in for like a second or two. You hold that, right? But then what follows? A full range of motion. Nobody's recommending that you only do isometrics for growth. So why then is it different with the big 3? Like, okay, you want massive forms, just grab on to heavy ass weight. That doesn't make any sense. How about you do a wrist flexion exercise and you hold it at the top? You're still going to get the isometric, but now it's with a range of motion to go with it. And that's where guys miss the boat. Same thing with the weighted stretch. Amazing stuff. And research has now confirmed that. So it's the lengthened position. That's the best for hypertrophy. Whenever a movement starts being like beginning of the range of motion, that's when it's most difficult. You get the most growth out of it, to the point where even a freaking leg extension, there was a research paper demonstrating that if you do partials at the bottom, it's more effective than partials at the top, even though it's designed to shorten the rec fem. So when we talk about weighted stretch, there's still got to be range of motion. When we talk about isometrics, it's got to be a squeeze in the shortened position, i.e. a curl or a chest fly or something like that.
I agree. And I think having a weighted stretch and being mindful to get every muscle group, at least the ones you prioritize, a weighted stretch at some point in your program is pretty important. And yeah, they're going to be a little bit more difficult to recover from. Like, just take like even just a bicep curl, like it's much more difficult and taxing to do like an incline curl than it is
Yeah.
to do like a spider curl, as kind of simplistic as that sounds. But I think the reason why people don't talk about this is because I think it comes down to minimalistic training and powerlifting.
Mm-hmm.
See a lot of people that have that kill 10 birds with one stone mentality. Deadlift is a full body lift. And then they're like, oh, well, I already got everything. And it's just very like
Yeah, but
minimal.
that's the issue with the deadlift though. Sure, it's a full body lift and it hits a lot of muscles, but not particularly hard. And I think the best example I've ever heard, this is from the OG Scooby 1961 from like 10 years ago. He's like, if compound movements were the best, at least the ones that involve the most amount of muscles, then technically swimming would be the number one bodybuilding exercise because it involves all the muscles in your body.
Yeah.
So how about we all do weighted swimming to get jacked? Of course, that's impractical. Yet somehow with the big three, this is different. Like let's, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's insufficient on everything. Like you look at the big three, and it's very well dispersed when it comes to training your full body. There's obviously certain parts uh, that get worked better than others, but everything gets worked to the smallest little degree minimum. So you have people that count like isometrics on a 5x5 deadlifts as an entire forearm workout.
yeah,
And
well,
that's the problem. And then you also take it and it's like, okay, well, the big three are trying to compete for the most possible weight you can lift. So therefore, you're trying to minimize your ROM, you're trying to maximize your own personal leverages, and that hides your weaknesses. And that's an issue. When it
yeah,
comes to hypertrophy training, that's an issue.
absolutely. And I think it's also because the big three, like you can get a great physique doing that, but it's not the only thing you should do. And that's what we're talking about here. And even like the old school lifters of the past, they didn't have access to machines and advanced movements or anything of the sort, but they did these movements properly. Like on the bench press, for example, there was no crazy arch or even scapular retraction for the most part. A lot of them benched off a wooden box with no leg drive, flat back, full range of motion, and they got pretty big chests from doing that. But it was always for rep work, not doing singles and triples. It was just, double progression. So that's the thing too. When you're programming these movements, the way you train them makes a big difference, not just the exercise. Because technically I can max out on a barbell curl and it's not going to do jack shit for hypertrophy, but I'm going to get a stronger curl. So you got to be careful, even with good movements.
100%. Yeah, no, I agree. That's a fun topic to talk about. So let's see what I got next that we could go over here. I think one thing I want to pick your brain on a little bit is just going to be kind of like the value of isolation lifts when it comes to volume. Like one of the biggest problems I ran into, especially as I became more of like an advanced lifter, and I've kind of briefly talked about like what my powerlifting numbers were, but I was about like mid 180s when I was powerlifting, and I had these like relatively good kind of like late intermediate, maybe like early advanced numbers. It was like a 330 pause bench, 455 squat, 605 deadlift.
Those are
And
great numbers though.
I appreciate it. Yeah. And they weren't bad, but it took me off of my hypertrophy program. So I was basically jumping to as quick as I could to the goal, ignoring the path, which would have built the muscle that I actually desired. So I shortchanged myself 100%. But I also found that, like you were saying earlier, when you have a heavy deadlift or squat, it takes forever to warm up and you have to be in the right mindset. Like it would take me easily for bench squat and deadlift. It would take me an hour for each one of those. So that's 3 hours a week if I was only hitting them once a week to actually get warm ups, the actual work in the long rests it takes once you get to X number. Like it just starts to add up. So the true value of isolation really starts to come into play once you break out of that like beginner phase and start to get a little bit stronger. I just want to get your opinion on that and what your thoughts are.
Well, yeah. When people get strong, they're going to understand that it takes a long time to do these heavy ass lifts, right? And you got to be mentally prepared as well. It's not just, you're throwing on plates at a rapid pace. You're not going to do that, realistically speaking. But one thing you touched upon, I think it was you in a recent video for isolation lifts, is that it actually is more time efficient because you don't need a lot of warm-ups and you don't need as much rest either. Now, obviously, the evidence suggests that longer rest intervals are superior for size. So that appears to be around 3 minutes or so. That's the cutoff point, right? Thing is, when you do heavy compounds, you're not going to rest 3, you're going to rest 5. because you want to replicate the best performance on a set per set basis. And heck, some guys creep it up even higher, right? So let's say you keep it 2 to 3 minutes for isolations just to be efficient. Well, you can do like double the work, you know,
Yeah.
like more than one exercise. And that's going to get a direct stimulus to the muscle, especially if it's a weak point. Like nobody's going to build a massive long head of the triceps just doing close grip bench. You're going to have to do some type of overhead extension or a push down in which you're getting some shoulder extension, you know, so the arm is coming behind you like this. So in a way that's actually more efficient. Like I would argue that if a guy did overhead extension with long head bias push downs, that he would get better tricep growth than close grip bench. So
Definitely.
yeah. So that's where they come into play.
100%. And I think the biggest thing that people miss out on is when it comes to recovery, I'm not just talking about muscular recovery. I'm talking about
systemic fatigue.
And systemic fatigue. Like you take, let's say you're doing a bicep tricep superset. Now, when your triceps are recovering, you're not going to be out of breath, and your heart rate's not going to be like 130 when you're doing push downs. So in a systemic sense, you're ready to attack another isolation exercise as long as it's a different muscle. And now you can go literally from lift back and forth. Let's say that the full set takes you 30 to 35 seconds. Now you're saving yourself another half a minute. And when you do 12 sets of that in a workout, you're saving yourself a few minutes there. And just, it makes a lot of sense in my opinion.
Yeah. You can even do
stronger.
You can even do giant sets like natural hypertrophy. I believe he trains calves like after every compound movement because it's so easy to do. Yeah. And it's like you said, like biceps and triceps. There's a reason why that goes well together. You could be straining like a madman, hit absolute failure, plus rest pause on your darn curls. Then immediately after, you're doing your push downs and it's going well, you're fine. Well, because it's not taxing on the entire body. And the same thing goes for leg training. A lot of stability involved when you have a heavy ass bar on your back or you're holding the bar, you know, and it makes it hard to do supersets. Actually, it's even harder with lower body because everything is like, you got to catch your breath for one. So like, how are you going to go to failure immediately after on something else? And the muscular overlap is pretty great too. Because if I do a squat, it's kind of hitting everything, you know? So if I do an RDL right after, like there's less of an antagonist effect,
right?
You know?
Because no, you continue.
Yeah, and with compound movements, antagonist supersets are certainly a real thing, but let's keep it real. It's harder on compounds than with isolations. You need to have the work capacity, and it takes more out of you. Whereas the isolations are just really easy to recover from. And what I always said is like, if you do 3 sets of 10 on a squat with 2 reps in reserve, that's harder than doing a bicep and tricep superset to failure. And that should tell the entire story.
All right. So quick little pause just because for some reason Zoom only does 40 minutes, but the next topic we're going to tackle is going to be the term accessory lifts. Obviously, you guys that are watching this have probably heard my video called Dismantling the Term Accessory Lift. I know there probably will be a few new viewers too. So to any of you guys, I do highly recommend checking that video out. To summarize my philosophy in the best I can, in the most efficient way I can, I believe that the term accessory lift is a term that should be reserved for powerlifting. I think that term doesn't actually make any sense when it comes to bodybuilding, because within the term accessory in itself, it implies that that is an inferior lift to something that is your priority. And when it comes to hypertrophy training, like we talked about earlier, it needs to be balanced, and you need to kind of target each area individually based on what your goals are. So there should never be something that is inferior that you're aware of in your program.
Yeah, I think it should just be defined as the muscle you're trying to hit in a given emphasized part of the range of motion. So for example, when I do my leg days, it's not leg accessories. It's a quad isolation lift that hits my rec fem in the short position, which I know is very detailed and nerdy sounding, but like I want it to be that way so that I give it my 100%, that I'm going to failure. I'm inducing progressive overload. I'm not just going to sit around and dabble and be like, oh, the hard work is done. The squats are over. Now I could just chill, you know? And sometimes these accessories is going to be a good 50% of your workout, you know, after the compound movements. So if you're going to half-ass half of it because it's not a priority to you, then of course that's going to affect your hypertrophy in the long term.
100%. So the biggest thing, and I think what what you talked about in one of your podcasts with Natural Hypertrophy was you guys brought up the study showing where people would do close grip bench or they would just do tricep extensions. You
Yes,
got a group that did both, and the group that did both gained the most muscle. So I don't see an instance where only one of those movements would be priority and only one would be accessory, because you do need both to get the most gains. So why would you
clearly.
emphasize one over the other? It just doesn't make a whole ton of sense in my head.
No, not at all. Especially if some of these accessories hit something that the compound can't even offer. Or maybe you just have a very specific build that even if on paper you should be growing from this movement, you're still going to have to do something that's a little bit more specialized. So the example that we can go back to, we talked about this before, was the long head of the triceps. It's not an accessory, it's a mandatory lift because you pretty much have to do it if you want maximum arm growth, like really emphasizing it. And same thing for curls. Curls are not an accessory lift. It's the best bicep developer ever invented because that's the function of the biceps, elbow flexion. It's not an accessory to your chin up, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. I think if anything, it's actually the other way around. And I did have another video saying that if anything, like your heavy strength work is the accessory to the rest of your program, because I think one of the biggest factors when it comes to hypertrophy training is going to be volume and making sure that you get enough volume and sufficient volume in to actually grow, but not so much where you can't recover. But when you calculate your total volume out, how much of that is truly going to be like the triples on bench? That's a very small portion. And I'm not saying if you have that in your program to treat that like an accessory lift, because then I would just be a hypocrite. But I'm just saying, if anything, I would have, like, if I had gun to my head, I would pick that as the lesser of the importance, because let's say you're doing 15 sets a week for chest and you have 2 sets of triples on a Monday, and that's 2 sets of your 15. That's not quite as important, because the bigger picture is making sure you get the rest of your like moderate compounds with a hypertrophy focus and your isolations in, and all
Right.
of that kind of builds everything up together.
So basically the strength work is technically accessory work if you want to label it for a bodybuilder, because you don't actually need to do it for one. And it's the least important part of the program. So like when guys are calculating the amount of sets that they do in a week, the triples and the singles, surely it adds up to that, but not to a significant extent,
Exactly.
Like personally, I don't really count it to the same level. Like if I'm doing 3 singles, I might only count one of those as a set because the volume is just so low.
Right. Yeah. Entire volume and tonnage is also, yeah, like you said, it's pretty low when you're doing that stuff.
Yeah. And personally, I grew the most. Like even when I look at my bench journey, realistically, what drove the most progress, it wasn't even the max effort. It was the 3 sets of 10, the hypertrophy work, the stuff that actually matters. Basically, if I would have had the other way around, I think I would have gained even less strength, just to say, so I know we're not talking about strength now, but your rep work is number one. That's what should be counted as actual sets. And even with the isolations, that's what a full set is. Not what I'm saying is, if you do a close grip bench, that's not 1 set for your triceps. It isn't. The primary mover is the chest. So it's 1 set for your chest. It might not even be a half set for your triceps. It could be a quarter of a set. Or how about, fuck that idea. You count it as 0 and you just try to get whatever the guidelines are, 10, 20 sets a weekend through direct isolation work for your tris. By that definition, it's not going to be an accessory. It's going to be pretty much the only thing that you do.
Yeah, it's the meat and potatoes of your program. I mean, it just makes a ton of sense. And what a lot of you will come to realize is, yes, when you first start lifting, a deadlift can put on a little bit of muscle everywhere, but you get to a point where it's no longer sufficient to keep adding on muscle to those areas that aren't a primary mover in that lift. And the deadlift is just an example, but you take a lift, like, especially for most people that have generally like average, slightly below or above genetics, a close grip bench. Yeah. When you first start, obviously your triceps are going to grow, but you get to a certain point where now it's no longer sufficient and you require more direct work and you require more volume to actually grow. You can't just rely on one lift. Like you can't just do 18 sets of close grip bench every week with the right intensity and the right proximity to failure. Like that's going to kill you. It will destroy your body.
It'll destroy your recovery, and I don't even think it would work for growth, to be honest.
No, because your performance would drop so quickly. Like there's just no way you can do that many quality sets too, and it's not enough isolation either. Like it's just one angle.
No, absolutely not. And the thing is, like your chest and shoulders still get heavily involved. I don't think guys realize that. And the way most people do a close grip bench is not the way bodybuilders used to do it. What it really is a closer bench press. So if they're benching at the rings, they just bring it in like that. It's like shoulder width apart.
Right.
But like when we look at things like EMG, which isn't the most reliable, what do we know about maximizing tricep growth from presses? The diamond position is number one. Now, who's benching like that? Nobody. But if you look at some old school bodybuilders, they used to use the easy bar, the inside grip, and they would close grip bench like that right after the skull crushers. So they'd be pretty exhausted. So that's where it makes more sense. But if you're doing a powerlifter close grip bench, that's not a tricep exercise.
Yeah, it's just a more difficult chest exercise. I mean, that makes a ton of sense because you have people like, obviously you can't close grip bench with a barbell like this because the position it puts your wrist in, but when you have a little bit of bend in there, it's the same thing as an easy bar curl.
That's right. Yeah.
Instead, now it's a little easier on your wrists. And yeah, maybe that's not the most practical thing to do with the bar, but yeah, if there's like a closer grip machine that's even narrower than shoulder width, I mean, based on what you're saying, that could be a pretty legit actual press compound movement for targeting the triceps as a primary mover. That's cool.
I would say it's even better, yet it's never going to be labeled as a primary lift. And I would argue that a diamond push-up is one of the best compounds for your triceps, but no powerlifter is ever going to say that's primary. You know?
Yeah. Interesting. So yeah, I guess I want to pick your brain. One thing that you've talked about a lot, and especially in the past, is the muscles to prioritize to get like an overall bigger physique. And I know your whole naturally enhanced phase and everything where you talk about what muscles were most important for natural lifters just to look all around jacked. But I just want to hear a little bit more about like the way you train. Like what's your like physique goal, and what muscles do you think are most important for most lifters to be hitting the most?
So, I mean, naturally enhanced is a good resource to look at for the physique that I used to talk about a lot. These days, I'm not really chasing that. It's not my personal goal. But the thing is, everyone has a subjective viewpoint of what aesthetics entail. I suppose my viewpoint these days would be more the old school bodybuilding approach, looking like Steve Reeves, a physique like that, Fred Roland, George Eiferman, the old school legends, Leroy Colbert. And that basically entails a V-taper physique, first and foremost, in which your legs are not the biggest part of your body. You know, so that might mean for a lot of people, you won't need more than a 500-pound squat, caps, if we're talking about just correlating strength with size. But even then, you probably don't need that to begin with. I'm just saying, basically, you don't need to squat 600 pounds and beyond. You don't have to be a competitive powerlifter on the platform producing elite numbers. You don't want the biggest legs possible. You know, a good zone is capping them at around 26 inches, not 27 to 30, right? So basically you're intentionally leaving your legs a little bit smaller, but they're still pretty damn jacked, right? In turn, when you're doing a pose of any kind, it's not, you got this crazy outer quad sweep, you know, that's giving you this X taper look. It's you're wide and then it comes down and it comes out a little bit, but not out here. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So I like that old school aesthetic look where you got jacked legs where they're super defined. You got, like, they're very developed now, but not too big. And then for the upper body, it's again, like big pecs, side delts haven't really been a massive priority, but I do think it's important. Upper chest, I feel like a lot of guys are lacking on that. And moving forward, that's going to be my specialty because I did a tremendous amount of flat pressing and dips, and it did a great job for my lower chest, but not really my upper. And I feel like it's a lagging area, like it's filling in a bit, you know, but it could be more developed. So I want to specialize in the inclines and try to get more symmetry going on with that. Traps, I feel they're very underrated. Most guys don't work on them hard enough. But the thing is, they're going to grow a lot from your rows and just getting stronger as a whole. You don't necessarily have to shrug if you want to get good development. Neck, most people aren't training it. I would say if you get it to at least 16, 17, you can look balanced. But if you don't have that, then you probably should do some isolation work. Back, probably the number one area especially like I've been paying more attention to the lower lats in recent times.
Yeah.
Most guys aren't training it. And if you look at their physique, they have all upper back, you know, and I guess I've been guilty of this myself and promoting like just being yoked, but not necessarily emphasizing the width as much. And that was a mistake on my part because it does make a difference when you got that sweep coming out from the bottom. And the secret to developing that is a way to pull out specialization and leaving our egos aside, learning from the biomechanics realm. You know, there's certain stuff that you might think looks gimmicky, but it's actually fantastic. Like the iliac lat pull down, where the resistance is coming in front of you and you're just pulling in like that. That's a great lower lat developer. Or just using a neutral grip, not the super wide grip pull downs all the time. There's some stuff that goes beyond old school, and we just got to accept that. And even the usage of machines, I'm starting to become a little bit more receptive to, which old Alphadestiny never would have thought was a thing. But you know, if you look at guys like Big Z, he was doing a high inclined Smith press to raise his overhead press and build cannonball delts. You know, it's more stable. You got converging chest press machines, which take out the stability and focus on the main function of the pecs. You know, you're coming out and in instead of just being locked in doing this shit or having to rely on gymnastic rings, which are a lot more unstable. So basically, you know, my philosophy is building the body of an like old school bodybuilder aesthetically, right? You got that look, but using modern methods to help achieve it, if that makes sense.
Very well said. Yeah, that's awesome, man. I think the secret about the old school bodybuilders is, again, it's kind of the same thing about how to have an impressive physique naturally. It comes down to balance. Like those guys didn't have like those gigantic delts that you see guys have now. They had, if anything, their delts were almost like a little bit smaller on a lot of them. Like I know even Arnold, who obviously wasn't natural, but his delts weren't a strong point. Steve Reeves didn't have particularly big delts. He definitely had like a broad frame, but he had big arms and like wide lats.
Yeah, the arms are important too.
100%. Yeah. And I think attacking that physique with modern methods is the best way to put it. And the reason why, and I'm in the same boat as you, is I used to never do machines. I disregarded them. And when I did them, I would half-ass them. And I think the reason, looking back at it, because obviously we have 2020 vision looking back in time, is because people that didn't want to train hard would go to machines so they didn't have to train hard, because you can half-ass a machine a lot.
Exactly.
You can half-ass a bench because you don't have to compare it to anyone and see that you're weaker than them or not as big as them or whatever. But when you take someone that does train hard and you put them on a machine, that person's going to make a ton of progress. And that's what I've realized with taking the methods of the people that train hard, that did your heavy barbell lifts, and applying that mindset and that effort into a machine. That sets you up for some pretty good results with a pretty easy recovery too.
You know, beautifully stated, man. I think you nailed it. It's effort was lacking the entire time, and we falsely blamed the machine for a lack of progress, because you have a bunch of noobs showing up doing these half-ass circuits, not gaining anything. But if someone, and I think that's why when people say build your base with the big three or whatever, and then you can switch, it's not because these exercises are superior. It's because you're learning how to strain and there's no excuses. Now you actually have to do hard work because it's the most basic shit ever, and just it is what it is, right? But if you would have had that work ethic from the get-go, you could have been fine using some of these bodybuilding motions. So like, you know, if I'm used to doing squats for 3 sets of 10, damn near failure, if I go on a hack squat, I'm gonna be able to push myself to maximum intensity, but I might get even more growth in my quads from doing it because I'm taking out the stability. And I noticed this myself, like day one, because I did not do machines at all throughout my entire training career. I've been barbells and dumbbells only, and freaking gymnastic rings, which are very hard. When I started going to the gym again, and I was using those converging chest presses, I had no difficulties pushing my sets to failure, and I didn't find them easy at all. You know, like if anything, you have to force more because you're not doing all this balancing and stuff. And you know, you're going to lift a little bit heavier too, but at the end of the day, it's the mindset that goes in, you know. And even at home, I use a ghetto cable stack to train my back. No barbell rows of any kind. I'm getting bigger and stronger than ever before. And it's just because, you know, I got my manual weights that I'm stacking up on top. But if it was a pin in the gym, it'd be the same thing. But you got to have the courage to fucking go one down and actually track your numbers. And get stronger over time. And not that you're abusing progressive overload, but that you're still making an effort to improve your performance on these inferior movements, quote unquote.
Right. And one of my philosophies when it comes to progressive overload for hypertrophy is the way I like to think about it is I do still believe the best or one of the best methods is going to be Steve Shaw's rep goal system. I do a basically a format of this where your effort and your technique and your focus on that lift, the better you get at it, the reps will come, those overload automatically. So if I'm saying to do a barbell curl with 50 pounds with 0 reps in reserve, the better you train and the harder you train, the faster the total reps you get will increase.
Yeah.
And that's the automatic progressive overload, because if you're training without a static rep range and you have a certain proximity to failure to hit, it's up to how hard you train to determine how quickly you progress on that lift. And then it's up to you to realize, okay, now that I've trained this hard and hit this many total reps, now I manually have to overload with the weight, and that will bring my reps back down. And then the automatic overload happens by how hard you train until you manually have to add weight to that lift. And then that's a good long-term progression, because you're not forcing yourself into a static rep range where you don't get any benefits of higher or lower reps, and you're having this anxiety over trying to add weight and getting nervous and scared and insecure if you don't add weight on your bench in 2 weeks. Like,
it's a non-cookie cutter approach, and you know where you stand at all times, because the intensity is relatively consistent, being 0 to 1 reps in reserve. There's no guesswork like, oh, I probably had 3 more. No, you're pretty damn close to failure. And because there's that spectrum, you're in a particular zone, it's clear as day on a week-to-week basis when you just look at your logs, like, oh, I added a rep here, I added a rep there. You're not just following some arbitrary system like, okay, you're going to do 50% this week and then 55 the next. And then, eventually you're going to do a deload and restart it all over and have a new training max. That could be, like, it's good. Don't get me wrong. I train like this to a certain extent, but it does confuse a lot of people. And sometimes we just need a simple progression model. And what I've personally found, bro, is that besides because, I love bodybuilding and all that, but I do have some strength goals. I'm not going to lie, right? I do my max effort and my back downs, but all the other stuff, the accessories, quote unquote, that we were talking about before, I use simple double progression for the most part, or sometimes dynamic double progression, but I guess that's basically the same thing as a rep goal system, if you look at it. And that's what the old school bodybuilders all did like a century ago. Like this form of training is time tested. It's simple. It keeps you accountable. It's probably the way that most of you should work out. You don't necessarily need some advanced periodization scheme.
Right. Agreed. And I think the biggest thing about those old school guys is, like, they went in and they focused on what was in front of them. Like, they thought short term, in the sense that they went in there and, like, okay, I'm focusing on this workout and I need to crush it. And they weren't so, like, they wouldn't get worried if they, like, went back on weight because you had to follow this 5x5 and hit this weight to have this look. Like, they just went in there, crushed it, and they kept doing that. And then over time, that high quality volume accumulates, and that turns into muscle. And before you know it, like, these guys all just got big. Like, Steve Reeves got big from crushing his workouts. Like, he wasn't so caught up in all these other, like, minuscule little goals on the side.
Yeah. And what's cool is that it's sustainable gains. Here's the distinction, right? We're never in a peak state. We're just chilling, slightly getting better as the weeks and months pass by. That's the difference. We don't have hypertrophy blocks. There's no off seasons, quote unquote. There might be some specialization phases for lagging body parts, but at the end of the day, it's like we're base strength. We're just leveling up. I would compare it to Dragon Ball Z, if you like to watch that. We're not even in Kaioken or Super Saiyan mode. We're just leveling our base, and then if we decide to peak at any given moment, like we were talking about before, when bodybuilders do choose to like use these leverage techniques and all that, we can display at any moment. So, like, if we build our Larson press to 365, they, give us not even a month, we can bench 405, just to say.
Yeah, I hear you. What are your other, I just want to pick your brain about your training a little bit. What are your top priorities right now? What are your goals for 2022?
Yeah. So in the start of 2022, I was like, you know what, let me get that 200 kilo bench as a long-term goal, maybe 3 to 5 years. But the more I thought about it, and now it's been like 6 months in, I'm like, I don't really care, to be honest. I'd rather just get big. So personally, I want to work on this upper chest. I feel like it's lagging because I've only been doing flats for so long. So it's going to be mostly inclines. Overhead work is all seated moving forward. I'm not trying to have the support musculature limit me. So bigger front delts from that. Side raises, they're going to be pushed to the freaking limit because, again, I didn't isolate, and I feel like I got a lot more gains to make. I might see an explosive transformation where guys are like, yo, you got even more 3D delts. It's very possible. So I think isolation work is going to be key, and we're going to see what happens when an advanced lifter does that after years of being lazy on it. So that's going to be fun. And then arms, man, 17 inches. Yo, fuck having the spider physique,
Dude,
bigger buys.
Race me. Let's go.
Let's go, bro. But
Yeah.
bigger arms, bigger side delts, upper chest, more hamstrings actually, because I only did RDLs and good mornings and deadlift variations for so long. I never did the actual knee flexion, and I ended up with a horrible fucking imbalance. I think my hamstrings are my worst body part, which I never thought in a million years. But that's because of minimalist advice from all these assholes who say don't isolate, So,
Right.
Yeah, sorry if I'm being negative with that, but
No,
that's
my philosophy. So,
and even calves, bro. I got myself a calf block, and I want to do them standing, sitting down, and donkey style because they're not going to grow from squats. Let's just keep it real.
And how would you set up the donkey calf? Would you do it on the belt squat you have?
You're exactly right.
Possible?
Yeah.
That sounds super interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. And in general, most of my calf work is going to be done in the belt squat machine just because there's no pressure on the spine. And I found that, I don't know if it's because the way they're designed, but a lot of the calf machines feel horrible on the joints. Like the seated one seems to hurt the knees because you're pressing directly on it. I know Natural Hypertrophy showed his version where you put an easy bar higher up on your thigh, right? So I'm going to do that with the calf block. Then the standing, you can do it with a bar on your back or in the belt squat. So yeah, to sum this up, bigger arms, long head of the triceps and biceps, side delts, upper chest, calves, and the 500 squat, because I just want to get that card and just to say that I pulled it off, more of an ego thing. But do I care about it? Ish, but hypertrophy is really where I want to take things moving forward.
Yeah, well, that's cool that you can have specific goals that you personally care about versus someone else choosing the goal for you, because you get a lot of people that hop into lifting. You see this guy that's like cares only about powerlifting but says he cares more about bodybuilding, and then all he talks about is squat, bench, deadlift, and you kind of follow those numbers and the whole community gets caught up in that. But I do think that's cool because obviously based on your channel, you think for yourself, you create your own goals, and you start new ideas. And I think that's really important. So that 500 squat, that's something that you can tell you want. You didn't have someone else. Like, you're not doing that for someone else. You're doing that for yourself.
Well, that's the thing, man. And you too, you're doing a great job at that. And I applaud you because there's a lot of pressure out here. Like, trust, people want you to be doing certain numbers. And if you don't follow their guidelines, they're going to try to roast you hard. But because the natural community is getting so strong and we're just getting rid of dogmatic ideas, which I love to see, it's like you're in a good position right now. So keep doing you. But yeah, going back to training how I want, I got a lot of flag for that back then, man, because guys wanted me to compete in powerlifting. They were like, yo, you got some pretty good leverages. You're a strong dude. Do powerlifting, bro. Fucking do it. And I ended up competing twice in the bench press. And I'm like, why am I even doing this? Like, don't get me wrong. I enjoyed getting those PRs and it was fun. But I wouldn't want to do it again necessarily. It's not my thing. And sometimes when you just go back to what you really want, why'd you get started training?
Me?
It was to get buff, Yeah.
100%. Yeah, it was 100% to get buff. And I was almost on that same path you went down, because back in early 2020, I was actually kind of on a peaking program to compete in April. And then we all know what happened before that. So I was getting ready. I'm like, all right, I'm going to hit like the state records that are just, there's too many different weight classes to where those don't, some of them matter, some of them don't. Sure. But I was like, okay, now that I'm forced to be outside of the gym, I actually enjoyed doing push-ups, pull-ups, and I actually had a
Yeah.
cable machine. It was, you call yours ghetto. I was pulling bricks in a Home Depot
Oh, damn.
because each brick is 5 pounds during the gym shutdown. And I was like, this is what I love to do, build
Yeah.
muscle. And yeah, I didn't have the right access to add more weight and like do enough different variations to actually build muscle, but it was so much fun. And I was forced to like work on the pump and mind muscle connection and all these like not important methods, but kind of side methods that I just had ignored for so long. And it kind of revived my love for hypertrophy training in the first place. And it was fun.
Yeah. No, two things I'll say to that. Uh, One, if you would have done that powerlifting competition, you might have dug deeper into that rabbit hole. You know, you might have become a full-fledged powerlifter and your channel would never been created, just to say.
Yeah.
You never know, bro. You never know. So that, some things need to happen when you least expect it. And then you found your love again for hypertrophy training and discovering certain things. You're like, whoa, I really like this. And you were responding well in certain respects. It was the same for me. In a way, global events have been very bad for people's mental health, right? It's been hard these last 2 years, but at the same time, there's been certain benefits. What I could say for me conclusively is that it revived my love for calisthenics. I had neglected it for a long time, but then when nobody was able to train, I'm like, well, shit, I'm not going to be self-centered here. I'm going to make some bodyweight training content because I used to do it back in the day. And as I was making these workouts and training that way, I'm like, yo, I love this. And I was actually getting, pretty good results in some areas. And I was like, I got to start doing this again. And I got a new pair of gymnastic rings and a whole bunch of content was created, not only for getting better at those movements, but just hypertrophy, the weighted push-ups, the inverted rows, which are easy on your lower back,
Oh yeah.
isolating your muscles with rings and all this cool stuff. And sometimes it takes, something unexpected for you to revive your love. And even when I got shredded, I honestly, bro, I regretted not competing in a natural bodybuilding competition, even though I would have been surrounded with fake natties. When I was in that state, I was like, fuck, I pushed myself to this level. I'm proud of myself. I should have displayed it on the platform. Whereas when I got my 405 bench, I wasn't thinking, oh, I need to step on a platform and get that in the books, bench 405 at 181. No, to me, I got it. It's what it is, right? But when I got shredded, it was immediately like, yo, I got to display these aesthetics. So you find your original passion like years later sometimes. And I feel like if guys like you and me can just prevent people from going down the wrong path from day one, they're going to save a lot of time and headaches. Let me tell you.
100%. I appreciate that you recognize that, because sometimes I don't think I get this feedback, but sometimes I'm like, maybe I've gotten a couple comments here and there where it's like, why do you care so much? Like at the end of the day, you're going to get jacked either way. But I'm like, yeah, I mean, at first glance, it looks like that, but then you actually start digging into the trenches and putting your effort into certain programs, and like you get distracted from your goals, and that takes your mental right out of it. Now you're achieving a goal that someone else set. And at the end of the day, like if you're trying to be the jack of all trades and you actually do have a legit good mindset, you're going to burn yourself out real quick. Because back when I was power building, like I am so glad that the shutdowns happened, because that snapped me out of it. And it allowed me to like see through that blurred vision I had on what training is and why I was training in the first place. And it allowed me to get back to hypertrophy. And I did a lot of home workouts with some minimal equipment for a bit. And I actually took 6 months off of lifting because I was so like burned out and about lifting and everything. And then I kind of redeveloped it in my own sense and just created this gym that I'm sitting in that I know you can't see right now, but it's like I said to I think it was on like the Breaking Beta podcast. I want to say is where I said it, but it's not custom equipment, but each piece is designed for my needs and it's designed for what I want to do. So now the only things I can do are the things that I want to do, and that makes my training a lot more enjoyable. And it's also at the same time recognizing that as cool as bodybuilding is, the reason we got into it in the first place was to have the results outside of the gym. So keeping my workouts a little bit more short and efficient while also having more of a maximalist mindset allows me to not live in the gym anymore, but it also allows me to have the best results I possibly can outside of the gym and have that confidence that lifting really gives to us.
That's pretty badass. You're finally doing exactly what you want, and each piece has been carefully selected. Like you know that if you're using that hammer strength row, it's because I'm training my back in the lengthened position. You know, if you're doing that that line down press, it's because you want to converge. You know, like there's a meaning and it's yours, and you're using your plates, and no one else has access to it. It's just, you know, it's a fun vibe, man. It's not just a power rack and a barbell, and certainly satisfying when you're going back to your roots of bodybuilding and you're no longer living in the gym. Obviously, you save a lot of time working out at home as well. I would strongly recommend it to people. You don't have to drive, wait for people, converse, which it's nice to talk, but it does take time out of your day. And then, you got this muscle and you're just looking great in the outdoors. You come out, guns be hugging the sleeves. You look confident. You feel good. You're not just some bloat maxer. Life is good.
100%. And there's a special feeling. I know you have this too when you walk into your home gym and you're like, damn, this is sick to have. Like this is like my pride. I mean, I always make a joke that I have a house in my gym because this gym's gone kind of far, but it's just a cool feeling to train in like your own environment. Like I'll come down, I'll shut the big lights off and leave the LEDs on. It's automatically got like that cool atmosphere.
Yeah. No,
it's all my equipment. It's just like, it's a good kind of expression of yourself.
It's yeah, definitely. It is an expression of yourself, and you kind of get attached in the long term. It's like, oh, I love this room more and more, like when you first get it, it's like, oh, I don't know, maybe I prefer the gym, but then the longer you do it, you realize you prefer it. And I can say confidently that I would rather train at home than at the gym, though I do both in this day and age. Like that equipment, that's mine, I selected everything, like you said, and it's good vibes.
Agreed. And I think the biggest difference that I've noticed, and I'm sure you have too, is like when you're in the gym, and especially if you're a beginner, there's that social pressure to hit certain numbers and do certain lifts and lift a certain way. And when you're at your house, like you don't have that pressure on you. So yeah, I've been someone that's developed into lifting in my own way before I even really had the home gym, but that definitely emphasized it. Now it's like, no one's watching. There's no pressure. I just do whatever the hell I want. And
yeah,
I can try a method and not worry about looking dumb, which isn't something that I care about because I've been in the gym for years at this point.
Yeah.
A lot of beginners are like, oh, I just have to do what this guy does and be very standardized with everything.
Yeah.
And you're meant in kind of behind closed doors in the gym, like having your home gym makes a huge difference for that.
Yeah. Well, for beginners, they'll get intimidated by, say, neck training, or because they're skinny and frail, they'll get judged, right? But the thing is, when they build this amazing physique, people are not going to be criticizing them anymore. Rather, they will come up for advice. Like now, I can even do some dumb shit if I chose to. I'm gonna have some guys say, "Oh, that's a unique exercise. What are the benefits?" It's like nobody questions it because you got the results to show for. So, I would say it's good to get out of your comfort zone. But at the same time, there certainly is a pressure element, and I can say, like, even for me, the main thing is because I don't want to feel like a douchebag that's taking too much time. What I mean is I rest a lot between my sets just because I want to optimize my performance. And if I'm just there for like 3 to 5 minutes sitting on a bench, well, for one, I can't even leave that bench because if I do so, some guy might come in and take my setup. At the same time, it's I know other people want to use that bench to do something, and I'm just here like dabbling around. Whereas at home, I can work, I can edit between sets. There's just less pressure overall. You don't, there's no eyes on you like, yo, get the fuck off. I got to do my stuff.
All right. So thanks to Zoom, we're only doing 40-minute segments. So I just wanted to get back on here and say, thanks to everybody that watched this. Definitely shout out to Alex for coming on and taking the time to just chat with my training philosophy. And yeah, it means a lot to kind of have that support and hear another view from someone that is well-respected in the industry and well-respected from myself too. So yeah, Alex, anything else you wanted to say before we end it?
I think we're pretty much good, man. We touched upon a lot of important topics, and I just want to say thank you for having me on and continue the grind. You're making incredible videos that are really going to change the course of many novices and intermediates moving forward who maybe were going to go down the wrong path had they not come across your channel. So time is money, time is everything. And that's where you're giving back to the people. So I respect you a lot for that. You have a great physique and just keep doing your thing.
Damn, much appreciated, man. Thank you.
Thank you.